Have you ever had the strange and almost disconcerting feeling of reliving the exact same moment again, as if that scene had already happened before with the same people, the same environment, the same conversation, and all this precisely when you were tired, mentally exhausted, or emotionally overwhelmed? If this has happened to you, know that you are not alone. Millions of people around the world report episodes of déjà vu, and the most curious thing is that many of them occur during periods of intense stress, extreme fatigue, or sleep deprivation. But why does this happen? What exactly is happening inside the brain at these times? Perhaps you've wondered if this type of experience is just a strange coincidence, a momentary glitch of the mind, or something deeper, linked to the workings of the human brain. Déjà vu is one of the most intriguing phenomena in modern neuroscience precisely because it happens quickly, intensely, and is often impossible to explain in words. It's as if, for a few seconds, reality slips away, and the brain swears that it's all been experienced before. Have you ever experienced this? The most interesting thing is that déjà vu doesn't choose time or place. It can arise in the middle of a casual conversation, when entering a new environment, during a routine task, or even in completely banal moments of daily life. But there's a silent pattern that few notice. These episodes seem to become more frequent when we are mentally exhausted, under constant pressure, or dealing with high levels of stress. And that's exactly when the curiosity begins to deepen even further. Stress and mental fatigue don't just affect mood or physical energy. They alter how the brain processes information, interprets the environment, and accesses memories. When we are exhausted, attention decreases, focus wavers, and the brain begins to operate at its limit. What you are about to discover may surprise you because this state of overload can create small glitches in brain processing, quick, almost imperceptible glitches, but enough to generate the feeling of extreme familiarity that characterizes déjà vu. And we're not talking about something mystical or supernatural. On the contrary, déjà vu is deeply linked to the systems of memory, recognition, and perception of reality. Under normal conditions, the brain can accurately distinguish what is new from what is familiar. But under stress, fatigue, or sleep deprivation, this system can become confused for fractions of a second. And when that happens, the present can seem like the past. Strange, isn't it? Stay with me until the end because throughout this video we're going to explore how stress directly impacts brain function, how mental fatigue interferes with memory, and why these states create the perfect scenario for déjà vu episodes. We'll connect science, curiosities, and real facts about the human brain in a simple, clear, and fascinating way, so you understand what's really happening when this sensation arises out of nowhere. Perhaps, after understanding this phenomenon, you'll never see déjà vu the same way again. Perhaps it's not a random error of the mind, but a subtle sign that the brain is operating at its limit. And as we move forward, we'll delve even deeper into this mystery of the human body, starting with the basic workings of the brain and the first indications of how stress and fatigue can distort our perception of reality. And while you recognize yourself in these situations, it's worth taking a quick pause to realize something important. This type of experience is usually much more common than we imagine, but it's almost never spoken aloud. Many people experience déjà vu during moments of stress or extreme fatigue and keep it to themselves, unsure if it's normal, strange, or if anyone else is going through it too. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has resonated with you so far. Tell us if you've ever experienced something similar, in what situation it happened, or how you felt at that moment. This exchange is powerful because it shows that no one is alone in these very human and curious experiences. And if, in any way, this content has already made you look at your own brain with more attention and curiosity, consider liking the video. This simple gesture helps much more than it seems, because it signals that this type of topic deserves to be shared with more people who are also interested in the mysteries of the human body and the strange phenomena of the brain. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who may be experiencing these same sensations without understanding why. If you enjoy content that blends science, curiosity, and reflection in an accessible yet profound way, subscribing to the channel is a way of saying you want to continue exploring these mysteries with me. That's how we build a curious, inquisitive community open to better understanding how the human mind really works. Every comment, every like, and every subscription helps this project continue to exist and evolve. Now that you understand that déjà vu may be much more linked to stress, mental fatigue, and how the brain processes reality than to something random or inexplicable, the question remains: what exactly happens inside the brain when these states intensify? How do memory, attention, and perception begin to become confused in these moments? That's what we're going to explore from now on, delving even deeper into the workings of the human brain and the invisible mechanisms that can transform the present into something that, strangely, seems to have already been experienced before. When we talk about déjà vu, it's common to imagine something mysterious, almost supernatural, as if it were a mistake in reality or a kind of glimpse into the future. But, in practice, déjà vu is much simpler, and at the same time much more fascinating, than it seems. It's a quick, intense, and profoundly strange feeling of familiarity that arises even when the situation is clearly new. You know rationally that you've never been there before, that conversation never happened, that moment is happening for the first time, but still, something inside you insists on saying otherwise. This sensation usually lasts only a few seconds, sometimes less, and disappears as quickly as it appeared. There's no time to analyze, question, or fully understand. When you try to explain, words seem insufficient. It's as if the brain has taken a small leap out of time and then immediately returned to its place. This is one of the reasons why déjà vu attracts so much attention and generates so many different interpretations throughout history. And here's an important point: déjà vu is not rare. Quite the contrary. Most people have experienced it at least once in their lives, especially during youth and adulthood. This alone disproves the idea that we are dealing with something exceptional or restricted to a few people. What actually changes is how each brain reacts to certain stimuli, pressures, and internal context. The human brain is an extraordinary recognition machine. It is constantly comparing what you see, hear, and feel now with everything that has already been stored in your memory. This comparison happens automatically, behind the scenes of consciousness, without you realizing it. Under normal conditions, this system functions with impressive precision. It can quickly identify what is new and what is familiar, helping you make decisions, react to dangers, and navigate reality safely. Déjà vu occurs when this recognition mechanism suffers a slight interference. It's not a collapse nor a serious defect. It's more like a microscopic delay or an overlap of signals. For a fraction of a second, the brain registers the present as if it had already been experienced before. The feeling of familiarity appears before rational consciousness can confirm that it is new. And it is precisely this mismatch that creates the striking emotional impact of déjà vu. This experience can be seen as a kind of behind-the-scenes look at the mind coming to the surface. A rare glimpse into how the perception of reality is constructed in real time. And when this happens, the effect is so strong that it almost feels like a revelation. The sensation is not merely cognitive, it comes with strangeness, curiosity, and, in some people, even a slight discomfort. After all, if the mind can confuse the present with the past for a few seconds, what else might it be interpreting inaccurately without us realizing it? This is where concepts like mindset, transformation, and inner journey come in. Déjà vu is not just an isolated phenomenon. It's part of a larger set of processes that shape how you perceive the world, make decisions, and construct meaning from experiences. It reveals that the perception of reality is not a faithful recording of what happens outside, but an active interpretation, subject to interference, shortcuts, and minor distortions. When we understand this, déjà vu ceases to be merely a strange curiosity and becomes a sign of how the brain operates under different conditions. It doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's the result of complex interactions between attention, memory, emotions, and mental state. And often, it appears precisely at times when these systems are being pushed beyond their normal limits. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because understanding what déjà vu is in a simple way opens up an even more provocative question. Why does this phenomenon seem to intensify when we are tired, stressed, or mentally overwhelmed? What happens behind the scenes in the brain when fatigue begins to interfere with how reality is processed? It is at this point that hidden truths emerge about the impact of stress on the human mind and about how small processing glitches can transform the perception of the present into something strangely familiar, revealing much more about the inner workings of the brain than we imagine. Comment below, this makes sense to me. When we talk about that feeling of repetition so characteristic of déjà vu, it's important to understand that the brain doesn't function like a camera recording reality exactly as it is. It works much more like a real-time editor, receiving information, interpreting signals, comparing patterns, and constructing meaning all at the same time. Memory, perception, and recognition are not separate processes. They happen simultaneously behind the scenes of the mind at an absurd speed. Most of the time this works so well that we don't even notice. But occasionally this extremely sophisticated system can suffer small delays, and that's when the illusion begins to emerge. Imagine the brain as a control center full of panels and monitors. One receives what your senses are currently capturing. Another compares this information with past memories. A third assesses whether it is new or familiar. All of this happens in fractions of a second. Déjà vu can arise when, for an almost imperceptible instant, the signal of familiarity arrives before the signal of novelty. It's as if the brain were saying, "This has already happened," even before it has finished analyzing the situation completely. By the time consciousness reaches this process, the sensation has already taken hold. This small glitch doesn't mean something is broken. On the contrary, it reveals how complex and delicate the mental process is. A microscopic delay in brain processing, something so rapid that it cannot be measured without sophisticated equipment, is enough to create an intense, striking, and often disconcerting experience. That's why déjà vu feels so real. It's not a vague idea, it's a sensation constructed by the very system we use to recognize reality. The human brain relies heavily on shortcuts. These shortcuts help save energy, speed up decisions, and make life more efficient. Without them, every situation would require deep, conscious, and slow analysis. But these shortcuts also carry a risk. When information arrives out of sync, the brain may interpret the present as something already known. And this interpretation happens before reason can intervene. The emotional impact comes precisely from this unexpected reversal. This illusion of repetition is, in fact, a side effect of brain efficiency. The same mechanism that allows us to recognize faces in seconds, react quickly to dangers, and make intuitive decisions can also occasionally become confused. It's like a very fast system that rarely stumbles over its own speed. And when that happens, the experience is so strange that it seems like a revelation about something hidden in the mind. There's a hidden truth here that few people consider. The feeling of reality isn't something fixed, solid, or absolute. It's continuously constructed. What you call now goes through filters, comparisons, and interpretations before becoming conscious. Déjà vu exposes this process in a raw way. It shows that time, memory, and perception are deeply intertwined, and that just a small misalignment is enough to make everything seem out of place. This type of experience can provoke profound reflections on decisions, identity, and mindset. If the mind is capable of creating such a strong sensation of repetition without it corresponding to the facts, how many other perceptions of daily life are also influenced by internal states, emotions, and invisible contexts? Déjà vu ends up becoming a symbol of something greater. The silent journey of the mind trying to make sense of the world while dealing with limitations, pressures, and constant adaptations. And this brings us to an even more interesting point. If this illusion arises from a slight delay in brain processing, what happens when this system is already overloaded? When attention is fragmented, mental energy is reduced, and the brain is operating at its limit. These factors don't create déjà vu on their own, but they increase the chances of these mismatches occurring. It's like a system running with many programs open at the same time, where any delay becomes more likely. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding this illusion of repetition leads us directly to the impact of mental fatigue, stress, and exhaustion on how the brain organizes reality. When these states accumulate, the inner workings of the mind become more exposed, and what normally functions invisibly begins to leave perceptible traces. It is at this point that déjà vu ceases to be merely a curiosity and becomes a sign of transformation in how the mind is dealing with the world, opening up space for important revelations about balance, overload, and cognitive limitations. Write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." This is precisely where stress and fatigue silently, yet decisively, enter the scene. When the brain is rested, with sufficient energy and well-distributed attention, it can interpret the present with much greater accuracy. Information arrives, is organized, compared with memory, and recognized as new or familiar almost without noise. But when stress accumulates and mental fatigue becomes constant, this mechanism begins to function under pressure. And a pressured system tends to prioritize speed over accuracy. Stress doesn't just affect mood or the body. It directly alters how the brain processes reality. In situations of prolonged stress, the mind enters survival mode. Focus narrows, attention fragments, and the brain begins to operate by trying to handle as much as possible with minimal energy. This state is not a failure, it's an adaptation. The problem arises when this adaptation lasts for too long. Mental fatigue works in a similar way. When you are exhausted, the brain doesn't have the same capacity to analyze details, contextualize information, and clearly differentiate what is new from what seems familiar. It's like trying to watch a complex movie after a whole day without rest. You can follow the story, but you miss nuances, confuse scenes, and overlook important details. In the brain, this translates into small inaccuracies in processing the present. To continue functioning, the brain begins to conserve energy. And the main way it does this is by resorting to mental shortcuts. Instead of deeply analyzing each stimulus, it relies on already known patterns. It quickly compares what is happening now with past experiences and tries to fit the present into something that already makes sense. This mechanism is extremely useful for quick decisions, but under stress and fatigue, it becomes less accurate. It is in this scenario that déjà vu finds fertile ground. When the brain is tired, the line separating perception and memory becomes more tenuous. Recognition can precede a complete analysis of the situation. The feeling of familiarity arises before the brain finishes confirming whether it has actually happened before. The result is this strange impression of repetition, as if the present moment had been pulled into the past. The most interesting thing to realize is that this doesn't happen because the brain shuts down, but because it's overworking. Stress, constant pressure, and excessive stimuli put the brain in a state of continuous alert. In this state, the mind tries to simplify everything. It reduces conscious effort, automates decisions, and relies even more on shortcuts. It's a mental survival strategy, but one that comes at a perceived cost. This dynamic reveals a hidden truth about how we deal with modern life. We live at a pace that demands constant attention, quick decisions, and immediate responses. Little space is left for real pauses, mental silence, or cognitive rest. The impact of this appears not only as physical fatigue, but also as subtle distortions in how we perceive the world. Déjà vu is just one possible manifestation of this invisible wear and tear. When the mind is overloaded, it loses sensitivity to the present. The now ceases to be entirely new and is constantly compared to what has already been experienced. This influences not only perception, but also how we make decisions, interpret situations, and react emotionally. A tired brain tends to repeat patterns because creating something new requires more energy than reusing what already exists. This is an important point in the mental journey that few people realize. Stress doesn't just create anxiety or tension, it shapes how reality is interpreted. It alters the mindset with which we face challenges, the clarity with which we assess risks, and even the way we give meaning to experiences. When the brain is exhausted, it prefers the familiar, even if that familiarity is only a momentary illusion. Déjà vu, in this context, can be seen as a side effect of a brain trying to handle more than it should. It's a subtle sign that the mind is operating at its limit, prioritizing efficiency over precision. It's not an alarming warning, but it is an interesting revelation about the inner workings of the mind. This perspective completely changes how we look at this phenomenon. Instead of something strange or inexplicable, déjà vu is understood as the brain's response to an internally overloaded environment. It shows that the perception of reality is extremely sensitive to mental state. Small variations in energy, attention, and stress are enough to alter how the present is experienced. And when you start to see things from this angle, a deeper reflection on transformation and balance emerges. How many everyday experiences are interpreted based on accumulated fatigue? How many decisions are made automatically because the mind is too exhausted to analyze them in depth? Déjà vu ends up becoming a powerful metaphor for this condition. A moment when the tired brain tries to recognize before understanding. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because understanding the role of stress and fatigue opens the way to something even more revealing. If these states can distort the perception of the present, what do they do to memory, sustained attention, and how the brain registers experiences over time? When we look more closely at these behind-the-scenes aspects, we begin to realize that déjà vu is not just an isolated phenomenon, but part of a larger set of brain responses to mental overload, responses that say a great deal about limits, adaptation, and cognitive survival. Comment below, I'm on this journey too. When stress becomes prolonged, it ceases to be merely an uncomfortable sensation and begins to directly interfere with how the brain organizes the experience of time. This happens because memory and attention are not isolated systems. They function in an integrated way, sustaining what you call the present. For a moment to be perceived as new, the brain needs to be attentive enough to register details and, at the same time, have balanced access to memory to compare what is happening now with what has already been experienced. Stress disrupts exactly this balance. In situations of constant pressure, the brain prioritizes what it considers essential for immediate survival. Attention ceases to be broad and becomes selective, focused only on what seems urgent. The problem is that, in doing so, many details of the present are not fully registered. When attention does not focus correctly on the now, memory comes into play imprecisely, trying to fill in gaps. And when memory begins to fill in what attention failed to capture, the risk of confusion increases. It is at this point that the now can begin to feel like something already experienced. Not because it is actually a repetition, but because it was poorly registered from the beginning. The brain, upon perceiving this flaw, tries to compensate by resorting to previous patterns. It searches for something similar in its memory bank and associates that moment with past experiences. This association happens so quickly that consciousness interprets it as immediate familiarity. The result is the sensation of déjà vu. From a scientific point of view, this involves areas of the brain deeply linked to memory and attention, which are highly sensitive to stress. When these regions are overloaded, they don't stop functioning, but they operate less precisely. It's like an experienced team working under extreme pressure. The work continues to get done, but with a greater chance of small errors. These errors aren't big enough to disrupt the system, but they are enough to alter the subjective experience. When attention is weakened by stress, it cannot sustain the present moment long enough. The moment passes too quickly through consciousness. Meanwhile, memory stimulated by this void kicks in prematurely. This inversion creates a curious sensation. You feel you've been there before, but you can't pinpoint when or how. This inability to identify the source of familiarity is one of the most intriguing hallmarks of déjà vu. The most important thing to understand is that this doesn't represent an illness, a disorder, or a sign that something is seriously wrong. It's a side effect of an overloaded brain trying to function amidst excessive demands. Stress alters brain chemistry, affects the ability to focus, and modifies how experiences are registered. All of this directly influences how the present is perceived. This observation reveals an important aspect of the modern mindset. We live in a near-permanent state of stimulation, demands, and acceleration. Little space is given for real pauses, mindfulness, or mental rest. The impact of this appears not only as physical or emotional fatigue, but also as subtle distortions in the subjective experience of reality. Déjà vu is one of these distortions, perhaps one of the most intriguing because it exposes something that normally goes unnoticed. When memory and attention are not aligned, the brain loses temporal clarity. The present becomes blurred. And when the present is not experienced clearly, it resembles the past. This confusion is neither conscious nor controllable. It happens behind the scenes, while you believe you are simply living an ordinary moment. This is why déjà vu often arises unexpectedly and disappears so quickly. This phenomenon also invites us to reflect on decisions and behavioral patterns. A stressed brain tends to repeat familiar paths, not only in perception but also in choices. It prefers the familiar because the familiar requires less energy. Déjà vu, in this sense, is almost a symbol of this tendency. A gift that seems old because the brain is too tired to treat it as something new. Looking at this more deeply, it becomes clear that stress doesn't just steal tranquility, it interferes with the quality of conscious experience. It shapes how reality is perceived, interpreted, and stored. Small lapses in attention today become inaccurate memories tomorrow. And inaccurate memories fuel strange sensations in the future. Everything is connected in this silent journey of the mind. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because understanding the impact of stress on memory and attention leads us to an even more intriguing question. If the brain, under pressure, begins to confuse the present with what has already been experienced, how does this manifest itself in moments of extreme exhaustion? What changes when fatigue is not only mental but physical, emotional, and accumulated over time? By following this thread, we begin to see déjà vu not as an isolated event, but as part of a larger picture of the brain's responses to limits that we often ignore. Comment below, that makes sense to me. When we put all these elements together, memory, attention, stress, and fatigue, it becomes clearer why déjà vu appears so frequently during moments of exhaustion. A tired brain is not a switched-off brain. It's a brain operating at its limit, trying to maintain performance at a pace that often exceeds its natural capacity for adaptation. Poor sleep, excessive stimulation, constant emotional pressure, and a hectic routine create an internal environment where small misalignments become much more likely. Poor sleep, for example, doesn't just affect the body. Sleep is one of the main times when the brain organizes memories, consolidates learning, and cleans excess information. When this process is interrupted or insufficient, the brain starts the next day with too many open files, pending tasks, and less clarity to distinguish what is new from what is familiar. The sense of the present becomes fragile. And when the present doesn't hold up firmly, it mixes with the past more easily. Excessive stimulation works in a similar way. We live surrounded by screens, notifications, quick decisions, and simultaneous demands. The brain rarely has the chance to focus on one thing at a time. It learns to divide attention, to jump from one stimulus to another, and to respond automatically. This constant fragmentation creates fertile ground for perceptual errors. The brain registers parts of the moment but not the whole. Then, it tries to complete the experience using old patterns. It is in this hurried filling that the feeling of déjà vu can arise. Emotional pressure also weighs heavily in this process. Situations involving demands, expectations, excessive responsibility, or fear of making mistakes keep the brain in a prolonged state of alert. In this state, the mind prioritizes efficiency and speed. It wants to solve, decide, and move forward. The finer details of the experience lose importance. And when the detail is lost, the brain resorts to what it already knows. The familiar becomes a comfortable shortcut, even if it's just a momentary impression. The fast-paced routine completes this cycle. Full days, a series of commitments, little time for real breaks, and almost no space for reflection make moments seem alike. The brain begins to experience a kind of functional repetition. Even new experiences are lived in haste. The impact of this is subtle but profound. The present ceases to be fully lived and becomes quickly categorized. And what is categorized too quickly can seem already known. Examples are everywhere. In traffic, when you're driving on autopilot after a long day and suddenly feel like you've experienced that intersection exactly like that before. In intense work, when a meeting seems like an exact repetition of another, even with different people and contexts. In studies, when you read a page and have the strange feeling of having already encountered those ideas before, even knowing that the content is new. In important decisions, when everything seems too familiar, as if that choice had already been made at some other point in life. These situations have something in common. They happen when the mind is tired, stressed, or overwhelmed. Déjà vu doesn't arise in profound silence or complete rest. It appears amidst noise, haste, and excess. It's a side effect of a mind trying to handle too many things at once. This brings an interesting revelation about the modern journey. We live seeking productivity, performance, and quick answers, but we rarely stop to observe the impact this has on how we perceive reality. Déjà vu ends up being a small crack in this accelerated rhythm. A moment when the brain reveals that it is recycling perceptions because it didn't have the time or energy to register the new information in depth. This recycling isn't conscious. It happens behind the scenes while you believe you're just following a routine. And the more this routine intensifies, the more the brain relies on old patterns. The present becomes an echo. The feeling of repetition doesn't come because life is repeating itself exactly, but because the mind is too tired to fully differentiate each experience. This understanding changes the mindset with which we look at déjà vu. It ceases to be merely a curious phenomenon and becomes a reflection of the impact that lifestyle has on the mind. It points to invisible limits, to silent adaptations, and to choices we make every day without realizing it. Choices about rhythm, rest, attention, and presence. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because if exhaustion creates the perfect scenario for déjà vu to appear, there's something even more revealing behind it. The brain doesn't just react to fatigue in general, but to specific types of exhaustion. Some affect perception more, others interfere directly with memory, and still others alter how time is perceived. By understanding these differences, we begin to see how certain mental states amplify this feeling of repetition and what this reveals about the real limits of the human mind. Write it in the comments. I'm on this journey too. Understanding when déjà vu is a normal experience and when it deserves more attention is an essential part of this journey of understanding, especially because this phenomenon often provokes extreme interpretations. On one hand, there are those who treat déjà vu as something mystical or inexplicable. On the other, there are those who completely ignore the experience as if it had no meaning whatsoever. The truth lies in a much more balanced point between these extremes. In the vast majority of cases, déjà vu is perfectly normal. Sporadic episodes are part of the human experience precisely because the brain is a complex, fast, and highly adaptable system. When memory, perception, and recognition become out of sync for a fraction of a second, the result can be this intense feeling of familiarity. It arises, causes strangeness, and disappears on its own without leaving any consequences. This type of déjà vu does not alter personality, does not compromise decisions, and does not indicate a loss of control. It merely reveals, for a brief moment, the inner workings of the mind. In healthy individuals, this phenomenon is usually rare, brief, and isolated. It can occur once a month or even at intervals of years. And when it does occur, it is generally associated with specific contexts. Accumulated fatigue, excessive stimuli, emotional stress, or periods of reduced attention. In these cases, the brain is simply signaling that it is dealing with a momentary overload. There is nothing pathological about it. The point of concern arises when the pattern changes. When déjà vu ceases to be occasional and becomes frequent. When the sensation lasts more than a few seconds. When it is accompanied by persistent confusion, memory lapses, a feeling of disconnection from reality, altered states of consciousness, intense fear without apparent reason, or noticeable behavioral changes. In this scenario, the phenomenon ceases to be merely a curiosity and begins to warrant investigation. It's important to discuss this clearly and responsibly, because addressing the mysteries of the brain without this care can generate unnecessary anxiety. Not every déjà vu experience is a warning sign, but some contexts call for more attention. Seeking medical evaluation when something deviates from the norm is not an exaggeration, it's self-care. It's a conscious decision based on observation, not fear. There's a hidden truth here that few people consider. The brain rarely collapses suddenly. Instead, it usually gives subtle warning signs. Subtle changes in time perception, memory, attention, or the sense of familiarity can be ways for the nervous system to indicate that something is being demanded beyond a healthy limit. This doesn't automatically mean illness, but it can indicate the accumulated impact of stress, sleep deprivation, emotional overload, or other factors that deserve attention. At the same time, it's crucial to avoid the other extreme, which is mental hypervigilance. Turning every déjà vu into a cause for worry can generate a cycle of anxiety that, paradoxically, further increases the chance of these experiences occurring. Fear alters attention, attention alters perception, and distorted perception reinforces fear. This cycle doesn't help the mind, it wears it down. The vast majority of people who experience déjà vu will never develop any neurological condition. The human brain is resilient, plastic, and capable of continuously reorganizing itself. It adapts, compensates, and finds new ways to maintain functioning even under pressure. Understanding this brings emotional security and helps to interpret these experiences with more maturity. This balance between normalcy and awareness completely changes how we deal with the phenomenon. Instead of ignoring important signs or dramatizing common experiences, we begin to observe more clearly. Observation without paranoia. Attention without fear. Awareness without judgment. This change in mindset transforms the relationship we have with our own brain. Déjà vu, viewed from this perspective, ceases to be merely a strange event and becomes part of a larger picture of how we live, think, and react to the world. It fits into a broader narrative about pace of life, cognitive overload, and invisible limits. It invites us to reflect not only on how the brain works, but also on the impact of the daily choices we make. Choices related to rest, stimulation, priorities, and decisions. When we understand this, déjà vu loses its frightening, mysterious tone and takes on a more human meaning. It becomes a subtle reflection of the mental journey we are experiencing. A small sign that the mind is trying to balance speed, efficiency, and precision in an increasingly demanding environment. And the more we understand this balance, the more we realize that the phenomenon itself is only the surface of something much deeper. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because after understanding when déjà vu is normal and when it deserves attention, an even more provocative question arises. If this sensation can be both a natural effect and a possible warning sign, what does it reveal about the overall state of mind? What is the brain trying to compensate for when it begins to confuse the present with the past? By following this path, we begin to see déjà vu as part of a larger system of mental responses to the rhythm of modern life, a system that carries important messages about balance, boundaries, and awareness. Comment below, that makes sense to me. Perhaps déjà vu was never about predicting the future, accessing something hidden, or experiencing a strange glitch in reality. Perhaps it's just a discreet whisper from the brain saying it's too tired to separate the present with the clarity it would like. When we look at everything that has been explored so far, this possibility begins to make more sense than any mystical explanation. Déjà vu ceases to be a distant mystery and becomes an intimate reflection of how we are living, thinking, and demanding from our own minds. We live at a pace that rarely respects natural cognitive limits. Acceleration has become the norm. Decisions need to be made quickly, stimuli arrive without pause, and rest has become something negotiable. In this scenario, the brain does what it has always done to survive. It adapts. It creates shortcuts, automates processes, reduces the level of deep analysis, and tries to save energy wherever it can. The impact of this appears not only as physical fatigue or emotional irritation, but also as small distortions in the perception of time, memory, and reality. Déjà vu can be one of these distortions. This idea provokes a silent transformation in the way we perceive this phenomenon. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" perhaps the more honest question is, "What is my brain trying to compensate for?" Déjà vu, under this lens, ceases to be an isolated event and becomes a mirror. a reflection of a highly sophisticated system that continues to function, but under constant strain. It reveals the inner workings of a mind trying to keep up with a pace that was not designed to be sustained indefinitely. There's a hidden truth in this process that's rarely considered. The brain doesn't separate personal life, work, emotions, worries, and expectations. For it, everything is load. Everything consumes energy. Everything requires processing. When this load accumulates, the mind doesn't immediately collapse. It adjusts. And these adjustments appear in subtle ways. A lapse here, a distraction there, a strange feeling of familiarity where it shouldn't exist. Déjà vu may be just one of these discrete signs of adaptation. This perspective invites a deeper reflection on mindset and daily choices. Not in a superficial motivational sense, but in the real sense of reviewing the pace of life we have normalized. Insufficient sleep, excessive stimuli, constant emotional pressure, and a permanent sense of urgency shape how reality is perceived. It is no exaggeration to say that the way we live directly influences the clarity with which we experience the present. When the mind is exhausted, the present loses definition. And when the present loses definition, it begins to resemble the past. The impact of this goes far beyond déjà vu. It affects decisions, creativity, emotional memory, and even how we make sense of our own journey. A tired brain tends to repeat patterns because repeating requires less energy than creating. It seeks the familiar, even if the familiar is just an illusory sensation. At this point, déjà vu becomes almost symbolic. A gift that seems old because the mind is too overloaded to fully experience it. Rethinking the pace of modern life is not an attack on productivity nor a critique of progress. It is an invitation to awareness. The human brain was not designed to live in a permanent state of alertness, choice, and stimulation. It needs real pauses to reorganize memories, restore attention, and recalibrate the perception of time. When these pauses do not exist, the mind finds its own ways to compensate. Some are invisible. Others, like déjà vu, become perceptible and attract attention precisely because they break the feeling of normality. This reflection doesn't seek definitive answers or hasty diagnoses. It broadens our perspective. Perhaps déjà vu isn't something to be fought, eliminated, or feared. Perhaps it's a rare opportunity to perceive how the mind reacts when pushed beyond its comfort zone. An involuntary invitation to observe habits, decisions, and how we deal with our own fatigue. A silent reminder that the perception of reality is profoundly sensitive to the brain's internal state. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because if déjà vu can be interpreted as a sign of perceptual fatigue, there's something even more intriguing behind it. The way the brain perceives time changes according to mental state. Moments of exhaustion not only confuse memory and the present, but also alter the sensation of duration, urgency, and continuity of experience. When we begin to observe this relationship between time, mind, and stress, important revelations emerge about why certain days seem to pass too quickly, why others seem confusing, and why, at times, reality seems to repeat itself even when we know it isn't. Comment below, I'm on this journey too. And if all of this made sense to you, if at any point in the video you recognized yourself in these sensations or began to see déjà vu in a different way, stay with me a little longer. Subscribing to the channel is simply a way to continue this conversation and keep exploring, calmly and in depth, these mysteries of the brain and human behavior that almost no one explains in this way. If you've made it this far, leave a comment with the phrase, "I'm with you until the end," or, "This message was for me," just so I know that this reflection stayed with you until the end. And if this connection we created throughout the video gave you any insight, a new perspective, or even a good kind of discomfort to think about, leaving a like is a simple way to show that and help this content reach more people who also live through these experiences without quite understanding why. And to continue this journey, there's a video over here that perfectly complements this topic. Click on it and follow along with me there. The conversation continues.